Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to our Fellows Public Talk series. I'm Claudia Rizzini, the Executive Director of the Fellowship Program here at the Radcliffe Institute. It is my pleasure to introduce Lixing Sun, our Hrdy Fellow this year. From North American beaver lodges to macaque populations in the forest of East China, Lixing Sun has traveled the globe observing the animal kingdom. As a biologist and a science writer, he takes in our natural world as a rich wonderland, full of stories that reflect characteristics we might think as uniquely human: fairness, deceit, and cheating. Lixing work over the last decades has taken a look at how such traits have evolved in mammals, birds, and even fungi and bacteria. Lessons in survival using trickery and fairness are everywhere, big and small. His research often bridges biology and philosophy, offering profound insights into the moral and social implications of behavior observed in nature. By blending meticulous fieldwork and laboratory experiment with a deep curiosity about life's complexity, Lixing has reshaped how we think about the interplay between evolution and ethics. While at Radcliffe, Lixing is working on a new science text for a general audience titled Unsexed. He hopes this exploration of the evolutionary dynamics of sex and gender diversity will enrich society's ongoing dialogue on inclusion and social justice. The Q&A portion of the public talk today will be moderated by Lilian Polanco-Roman, Assistant Professor of Psychology at the New School and Mary I. Bunting Institute Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Lixing Sun.
Thank you, Claudia, for nice introduction and kind words. And thank you, everybody, coming today to listen to my confession about my adventure in the intellectually mined field of sex and gender. And I'm going to talk about three issues, basically. One is, what is biological sex? Especially, is sex binary? The second is, well, is sex equal? Does sex equal gender? The third one is a little bit of implication of that. And this reminds me of one example that when I was beginning to learn English as second language, the one fun thing, I'm not sure it's fun, but to learn different names of males and females, which actually does not exist in my native language, Chinese. So I began to learn these things and realized that, well, typically males are larger and females are smaller, and they use different names. Some of the words are not actually nice. So that is what we have been experiencing with males and females. And typically that would be okay if you see some animals like that. But there are a lot more like these. They have no difference. They look alike. Do we have different names for them? And moreover, there are quite a few species where females are a lot larger than males. So let's zero in one of them. This is one of the 300 species of deep ocean fish called anglerfish, where the male. Here. Diminutive and parasitic. And not to mention, we all know the very symbol of the nation where the females are larger than males by 20%. Do we have different names for that? And we take a look at these mammals, which we are one of the species, and only 45% of the species mammals where females are smaller than males. Small minority. It's a minority. Yeah. So this case tells us that biology is a science of exceptions. And it's not good to make sweeping claims without knowing a lot. And the second issue is, well, simple issues often are more complex in reality. And here comes my first simple and stupid question. What is biological sex? And it turned out to be, the question is neither simple nor stupid. It's to the very core of biology. Now we know that at least when we talk about sexes, biological sex, we could say, oh, that's genetics, that's chromosome, that's sex organs. And to biologists, no, sex is not about that. Biologists talk about so-called gametes, the reproductive cells. And how do biologists define reproductive males and females or reproductive cells? That was proposed by a biologist by the name of Jeff Parker in 1972. And his proposal actually has been widely accepted in biology. According to that proposal, which we called it gametic sex, there are two kinds. One is called isogamy. Don't be afraid of the big name. Iso means the same, gamete means marriage. When the reproductive cells are of equal size, that's isogamy. But when they are equal size, there is no male and females. It's unisexual. But if you still want to think there's male and female, you can say proto-sexes. They're proto-sexes, but it's unisexual. And the more familiar is the anisogamy, which means unequal gametes. Females produce eggs, large eggs, males produce small sperm. So that's the definition of gametic sex. Now, among these unisexual organisms, these two proto-sexes are still the norm, but there are a lot more. For example, the slime mold, this species has 3 proto-sexes. And a ciliate like this has 4. And the mushrooms you get from grocery stores has 18. You can examine that with genetic kit, see which kind of thing you are eating. And there's a small mushroom called fairy inca cap that has 143. And the crown goes to this split gill mushroom. It has more than 23,000 proto-sexes. And they are non-glamorous. Look at the species like that, and they are often on the floor of a tree area and on sticks. But don't smell them because the spores could grow in your nose. So you got to be careful. Now, from this humble beginning, unisexual single-cellular protozoans evolved to be multiple branches in so-called eukaryotic organisms. But today we are going to look at only one small little branch where animals are, because we are one of the species. But just in case you are not impressed, now we have an ostrich egg. It's a single cell that weighs about 3 pounds. 5 of them could feed 50 hardworking Radcliffe scholars for a nice meal. But relatively, the biggest egg is laid by kiwi. One egg could account for 1/4 of the body mass. And here is the iconic picture of a human egg and a sperm. And human egg is about 10,000 times larger. But if you feel bored, there is something fun. Currently, there are 80 species, or 80 more, and still counting species where invertebrates, where females undergo cloning or asexual reproduction, or you can say virgin birth. And some of the variations is this Amazon Molly. Amazon Molly and a few called mole salamanders. It's more interesting. The females give birth to itself. Basically, it's a virgin birth. But they need the males, needed to steal the sperm from males to stimulate the development of the egg without allowing the genes from the male to get into their system. But the most interesting of all probably is a French frog served in French restaurant in France, not here. But it's edible. Some of you probably have tried. But these edible frogs exist in terms of hybrids of two frog species. But they are not like mules. Mules are infertile. They are fertile. The way they do that is that when they produce eggs or sperm, they separate the genes from the two species so as to maintain their gametes fertile. It's a really cool system. So now you see a lot of variations in addition to this binary system. Now, the next question is sex determined by genes and chromosomes as many people think? Biological sex. The answer is yes and probably no. The way I say yes without a certainty is because there is so much variation. Typically, we know that, in mammals, in some flies as well, you have X, Y as male and X as female, which is common. But in birds, the script is flipped. And in some insects, such as bees, ants, and wasps, the females have two sets of chromosomes, while male only have one. So sort of male is half of female. So a lot of variation, just to show you that the sex chromosomes in mammals is a flip of those in birds. But let's zero in on mammals and the chromosome variations. Normally we know that XX is a female, XY is male. But there are at least 10 species now showing that the Y chromosome has degenerated and disappeared. So XX is a female and X is male. And there's recently one species discovered in Africa showing that there is a very powerful X there with X star. And whether there is a Y or not, depending on whether the X star is there, the feminizing X chromosome. So regardless whether there's Y or not, if there is this X star there, it's always female. And then we have to go to Australia to take a look at the monotremes, these platypuses, and they show something even more interesting. And when you take a look at this cute little platypus, you may not think they are the sexiest species in the world. They do not only have one pair of sex chromosomes, not even two, not even three, they have 5. They have 5 pairs of sex chromosomes. So this is how diverse the genetic or chromosomal determination of sex is about. But then we encounter some reptiles. Reptiles, their sexes are not determined by chromosomes, but determined by, most commonly, temperature under which the eggs are hatched. There are 3 types. The common one is, one of them is this: among turtles, when temperature is low, you have all male. When temperature is high, you have all female. And in between, you have a mix of males and females. And in some of the species of New Zealand, on the island of New Zealand called Tuatara, and the curve is reversed. And in crocodiles and in some iguanas, both low and high temperature produce all females, while intermediate temperature produces males, all males. So now you see sex is not really determined by even genes. But even things can go even weirder. And we all know these are Nemos. Some of us know well, or at least know our children grow up with them. These clownfish are there are about 3 dozen of species living in tropical ocean. All of them live in small social groups. Among the group, the biggest, the most dominant individual is a female. The rest are all males or immature. So when the female dies, or you take the female away, and the male second in rank will transform from sperm-producing male to egg-producing female in about a few months. And here comes my favorite species of swamp eel, which I used to catch when I was little in southeast China. And these eels started the other way around. They started as female, producing eggs. So when I dissected them, I could see eggs when they are little. But when they are about 2 years old, they began to transform into sperm-producing male. So you no longer see the eggs. And that reversal could also take place in some plants, such as some populations of papayas we eat. Now the question is why there is this reversal. Typically, we would often see that, well, as an individual grows, over time, they build up the muscle, they are more competitive for both males and females. No problem, they don't need to change. However, in some situations, when during the developmental process, an individual, when they are small and weak and less competitive, it's better for them to be female, because female has a higher Darwinian fitness. And suddenly, when they grow to a certain size, they build up their muscle and competitiveness, and their Darwinian fitness goes higher. And this is the time, if they transit to be male, then they have the best of both worlds than any other strategy. And that is the swamp eel. And for the clownfish, it's the other way around. It's better to be male to start with. And when you are strong enough and competitive enough, you transit yourself to be a female. So you get the best of both worlds. So then we come to another question: is sex determined by sex organs, which we often think that's the case, and we use mammals as example. And the first we encounter in the sub-Saharan Africa is a species by the name of spotted hyena. Spotted hyena, you can see the males in the back, the males about 10% smaller, the females about 10% larger. The reason being that the food is in short supply. The females are hard pressed to get enough food because they have to what? They have to be pregnant and give birth and also nurse and protect the babies. The females are hard pressed for getting food. So they are packing up the muscle, the body weight, and also at the same time, they increase the level of aggression so as to be dominant over males. And as a result, what do you see with a higher level of testosterone? It grows the male-like structure. It's called the pseudopenis. For lay people, normally cannot tell them apart from males. As a result of super aggression. So external sex organs may not determine, may not indicate biological sex. How about internal? We know that the females have ovaries and males have testes. And this is not the case in this common European mole, which is quite common in Europe. In this mole, they have both ovaries on the top, and they also have testes as well. The reason being that these are voracious mammals. Every day, just normal day, they have to eat about half of their body mass, which means if you are 150 pounds, you have to eat 75 pounds of beef to live for the day. So that's a lot for them. But females are hard pressed, even more during the mating season, giving birth and breeding season, and protective for their young and nursing their young. So females are hard pressed to be aggressive, to eat more, to secure the food. So what they do is in the beginning of the mating season, they grow this ovary pot first, lay egg, get them fertilized, get pregnant, give birth, and have a clutch of babies, about 4 pups. At that time, ovaries are useless now. So they channel the energy and material from ovary to grow testes. And testes pumps up lots of testosterone so as to raise their level of aggression for protecting their babies, for getting enough food, for fighting for food. So that's the way they maximally getting the stuff to be successful, to stay in their habitat, in their environment. So neither external nor internal sex organs can 100% predict males and females. Now, how about humans? Yep. You can say yes, but there is a lot of variation. Typically, we say normative, we have 46 chromosomes, among which XX determines male and XY, XX determines females, and XY determines male. But then there are lots of variations. This is not a full list. There are more of these sex chromosome variations. I mean, you can see 2 of them, at least 2 of them, showing that their fertility is not affected. Why do we call them abnormal? We just don't understand yet why they exist. And they are normal, actually. So these are some of the variations. And then we look into the modern biomedical science. You look at the genes involved, at least 30 genes involved in sex determination out of 60, probably even more, but this is our current understanding. With SRY gene, a so-called male determining gene, which is located on Y. With XRY present, and that will activate so-called SOX9 gene, which moves on to build the testes. If this SRY is not bossing around, then the WNT4 take charge of the process. And that will activate the FOXL2 gene, which leads to the build of ovaries. But of course, this is a simplified version. The real process is more complex. And also, for the male sex organs to completely develop, you also need the help of this AR gene. So that is highlighted here. Now, this is another view of the developmental process starting from week 0 to week 5. The embryo is bidirectional, which means it can be both male and females. Until week 6 to week 8, if this SRY gene kicks in, and it will activate this SOX9 gene, which leads to the development of testes. Or if SRY gene is not there, and then the WNT4 gene will activate this FOXL2 gene, leading to the development of ovaries. And then, from then on, lots of genes are kicked in, activated, and working together all the way to the fully developed internal, external sex organs. So it's a very, very complex. Anything can happen. Now, indeed, these are 2 extremes. The genetic sex blueprint and the morphological structures are totally in opposite direction. That has already been found in 4 species, including us. But I think that there will be more if we look into more species. Now, we come back to the simplistic question, is biological sex binary? Of course, the genetic one does not work. The sex organs one does not work. Now we have one left, that is a gametic sex, whether sperm and egg are binary. There's nothing in between. Now we take a look at what we have already talked about in the summary, but let's focus at this within the box. You will see among all the invertebrates, vertebrates, and mammals in particular, whenever there are binary sex systems, there's always discoveries of cases for intersex individuals. And one of the most fascinating intersex individuals are called gynandromorph. GYN means female, and andro means male, gynandromorph. And this is a very rare situation, but very interesting. Why? Because the male and the female is half-half in the species discovered, and that is in, you can see in the swallowtail butterflies, and in the Maine lobsters, they have already found it, and in chickens, which is more common. And surprisingly, in 2019, one cardinal bird found to be half female, half male in Erie, Pennsylvania. And how about humans? Yes, of course. You can look at the internet, but I believe some of them are fake, because nowadays it's so easy to make them. But I would trust the medieval drawing. This is a 16th century drawing in Europe, and then one person, intersex person, half male, half female. Now, the question is why intersex persists in all animals? So this indicates there's adaptive value. So we have to look at the adaptive value. Now that reminds us to a beehive. Typically you have one queen, which is reproducing female. And occasionally a few drones there, but the vast majority are these unsexed or intersexual workers. They do everything else. They exist as intersexual individual. And that leads to one of the most successful group of animals. These are the ants. About 30,000 species. They're everywhere. Their biomass adds up to be more than all the birds and mammals combined on Earth, except humans. They account for about 20% of humans. So this is a huge biomass. But they all have vast number of individuals as intersex because they don't produce anything. They don't lay eggs. They are genetically blueprinted as female, but they don't do that. And this also happens in birds as well. In 300 species and counting, for example, young birds, 1-year-old birds, do not move out from their parents' nests to reproduce by themselves. Instead, they help their mom and dad to take care of their younger siblings. They do that for at least one breeding season. And in mammals as well, this is a not good-looking photogenic species, but it's a famous, it's called the naked mole rat. It has a social structure just like bees, ants, and wasps, with one queen who is in charge of reproduction. Everybody else are intersex individuals. Very successful, yeah. They do everything from collecting food to fighting against others. So now, intersex is a viable adaptive strategy. In addition to we have this gametic sex, male and female, the spectrum of intersex is everywhere. Now the question is why? So I began to look around. The why. So the king selection is my tentative answer. King selection allows organisms not to directly participate in reproduction by themselves. They actually could promote their genes by helping their relatives so that they actually get their genes passed down because they share genes. So with this kin selection as evolutionary force, intersex is always there, is a viable evolutionary strategy. Now that comes to the high-stakes sports and we know that it's binary, it's a binary system. And in the old time, they use anatomical examination to tell women from males from females apart. And since 1968, they began to switch to more technological means, such as the chromosome test. And in the 1990s, they began to switch to pinpoint to testing the SRY. Turned out to be that was not successful. In the 1996 Atlantic Olympics, 8 people participating in women's events were tested positive for SRY gene. But their external sex organs are all female, all female. The reason being that at least 6 of them are having this mutation in the AR gene, which is essential to build male organ, because they have these XY chromosomes. But it's not fully responding for their body. So these are intersex people. And this also reminds us to one of the recent examples about Caster Semenya, a 800-meter distance runner from South Africa. And she was tested as XY individual, but everything else was showing the female features. So now you can see that, well, if sports are divided into binary categories and humans are not, so there's no solution in current situation. Now that brings us even a more complicated issue of gender. There's no consensus in biological definition, lots of confusions as well. Sometimes policies are not helping. In the 2000s, in NSF, suddenly NSF believed that sex is a dirty word. Let's get rid of it. So then you have the gender for pandas. Gender for pandas, that's nice. And then it comes up gender for cockroaches and gender for plants. So it's getting even worse. So what is gender, by the way? So I pull out the UN definition. So you can read this through. Refers to the social attributes and opportunities associated with being male and female, and the relationships between women and men and girls and boys, as well as relations between women and those between men. If you are confused, you are not alone. Me too. Me too. But at least we know that the UN definition of gender is homocentric. It's for human alone. The second is gender is about gender role. It's a behavior. But when we look at this bird, we find there's a problem with this gender definition. This is an African species called jacana, African jacana, and sitting in the nest. That is a male. Males build a nest. The male does everything except laying eggs. So build the nest, hatch the eggs, and protect the chicks as well. And this picture, people often see it's freakish. So many legs there, but basically this is a male, a good daddy, carrying the chicks under its wing. So you see that the legs are sticking out. And this is the Asian species of jacana, the pheasant-tailed jacana, which convinced me to be a bird lover forever. In this species, the females are 50% larger than males. And then we come to one of the species close to home in Central and South America. That's the wattled jacana. And this is a female. A female has this bone spur used for fighting. The females defend the territory of several males as her harem. And they are vicious. They fight like a gladiators using sword. So the question is, why banning gender? Why banning gender? We can eavesdrop on the private conversation between 2 males. The one male says, well, yeah, do you want to hit the ball tonight? And the other said, what do you mean? Let the kids die? Which means the males do not have an option. They have to hold it on for the eggs like 3 months and taking care of the chicks. Otherwise, if If the males leave them onto the ice, the chicks would die of freezing in a few minutes. So there's no better way than swapping the gender for males to be adaptive, to be reproductively successful. Now, coming to mammals, the gender bending is very common and sometimes so subtle that we even don't realize. This is an example of, this is a uterus on your right. The uterus of a Mongolian gerbil. And several eggs are fertilized at the same time, so they're developing at the same time. It's sort of like a crowded student dorm. But they are more like pickles in a pickle jar because these eggs, the embryos are developing in fluid, in body fluid. But the problem is the embryos during development also generate hormones, especially testosterone. So a female sandwiched by two brothers, the warm brothers, would be masculinized. Or a male sandwiched by two sisters would be partially feminized. And this happens in humans as well, especially for the fraternal twins, when the two embryos are of different sexes. The male typically would be feminized and the female would be masculinized. If you feel this is too rare, then look at your finger as well. Prenatal exposure to high level of testosterone often makes your ring finger, the fourth digit, longer. So you can check your own finger. It's a cottage research, industry research. People look at the monkeys and look at the rodents, turn out to be statistically true. So by these limited examples, we see that gender really is a collection of biological traits, not just the behavior. It's including morphology, muscles, physiology, hormones, even neural wiring as well. And the reason, the adaptive reason, is you can adjust to the certain levels, certain kind of social ecological conditions, so as to perform better than without adjustment in direct or indirect reproduction. So let me end with my favorite quote, which is probably everybody else's quote as well, by Hegel. However, there's lots of controversy as to what is the correct English translation. So I let the author himself speaking out. Was vernünftig ist, das ist wirklich. Und was wirklich ist, das ist vernünftig. And this is very much appropriate for our current understanding of sex and gender diversity. It is real, which is the wirklich, and the reason is not understood yet. So that is our job in science and beyond. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So, Lixing, thank you so much for that insightful and fun talk. That really challenges our current ways of thinking about sex and gender. Thank you. So I will go into some questions for you to hopefully get some context and background as to what prompted this project for you. So if you can share a bit about what inspired this idea for you, what led you down this research inquiry.
Yeah, much of my research work is on about sexual selection. So looking at the issues related to behavior and development morphology is part of my everyday work. But then I realized, wow, especially the NSF rule that you cannot use the word sex anymore, I realized, well, there got to be lots of misunderstanding and confusion there. So I began to search for more information, read more, and try to keeping me up with newest developments. And then I found, wow, we have lots of misunderstandings. So, and then I get into reading the popular articles and debates, and too much these ideologically motivated debates. I think you cannot really settle a controversial issue by just debating per se. You needed to look for something beyond, something more objective. So I think science probably would be good. So that's the reason I began to look into it.
And so this leads me into my next question, which is, what would you say is the most surprising finding that you came across as you began to do research?
Yeah, the intersex in terms of most fundamental biological sex definition, which is the gametic definition. Some people still believe, such as Richard Dawkins, still believe sex is binary. It's only partially correct. I would say binary is incomplete. There is the spectrum of intersex coexisting with binary. So I think my most important contribution is finding the kin selection as a mechanism to explain why intersex spectrum can sustain in evolutionary process.
Yes. And I'd like to take this time to encourage the audience to share their questions via Slido. So thank you, Lixing, for your response to that. I was hoping you can also share a bit about what might be sought in our conversations about your book, and this being a representation of maybe the first or second chapters of this book. If you can share a bit about what future directions would look like, what would the subsequent chapters of the book look, building on what you've found so far?
Yeah, the book is almost completed in terms of manuscript. It will have three parts. The first is the origin of sex. The second part is about sex and gender variation, and the third part is sexual selection. So I try to, currently most of these debates probably are based on information about 3 decades ago. So it feels like ancient arcane. So I try to give people a general view about the current understanding, also with my personal search as to what sex means. So that is something completely new. Reflecting my own intellectual journey in the area related to these issues. But it's totally science, okay. Yeah. Totally science. I think science is more convincing than people get stuck into debates.
Yes. So you mentioned the current climate in sports and the definitions and the application of current conceptualizations of sex and gender being used in these sports organizations, right? And you know, just thinking about very recently, this most recent Summer Olympics, right? And the heavy scrutiny of a female athlete's body. And I'm curious if you could speak to that and you know, and whether these concerns are legitimate, and then what would be your recommendations for how to move forward given your research findings?
Yeah, so the Algerian boxer, right?
That's right.
The Algerian boxer controversy. I mean, from Caster Semenya to Algerian boxer, these intersex individuals are normal. They exist among us. But our current sports, especially high-stakes sports, are all binary. So it does not solve the problem. I would hope that people will come up with better ideas as to how can we be inclusive as well as fair. So I think that's the controversy. And I don't see currently there is a viable solution to that. But I think at our time, everything is possible.
Right. Okay, I have, how are the changes in temperature due to global warming affecting the reproduction of those species that have temperature-dependent sex determination?
That's already happening. That's already happening. There is one species of sea turtle, which is now, I forgot which one. It's warming. Let's see. Turtle is, I see. High temperature produces females. There are one population now, it's overwhelmingly females now. They predicted in about a few years later, 99% would be female. So that would be threatening the very existence of the species. And lots of species actually are retreating or disappearing in some previously existing areas. So it's already happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. How much of the sexual and gender diversification is serendipity, and how much is meeting an evolutionary purpose?
You mean serendipity? It's a nice word. Serendipity is luck, right?
Yeah, by chance.
Yeah, by chance. There are lots of mutations happening, but look at the sexual development. So many genes involved. The mutations are normal. And just how we look at these mutations, and some people would be too quick to say that's just maladaptive. We don't know. Some of the mutations are just normal. So we needed to understand better as to the significance of these mutations, significance of their variations. And at the meantime, all these humans included, for example, humans, and because one person is slightly different in terms of genetic makeup, they should be still treated as alike, like everybody else.
Okay. Yeah. As described in the title of your talk, you use Unlonely. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit about how your findings and this research inquiry have been received within the natural sciences world and from the social sciences world. And so, and then kind of building on that, how has collaboration or interdisciplinary work shaped your understanding of this topic?
Yeah, that sex and gender issue is more discussed in social sciences and humanities, in fact. So unlonely means that, well, the topic is very interesting to lots of people. But in terms of natural science, there are fewer scientists involved in that, especially biologists. So I hope that more people will be interested in that, participating in discussion, conversation, dialogue, working together, and finding more interesting information and arriving some consensus. I think that's the way to go, and it is interesting it's interesting for lots of people, many of us, and many of you have already talked with me, and I feel encouraged. Thank you so much.
And I was wondering if you can elaborate a little more on that and why there is less conversation, discussion within the natural sciences or within your field. And
When I actually sent out the link for my talk yesterday, there was a good friend of mine, a distinguished scholar. He sent me a comment, "Be careful." You see, this is, I said it's intellectual minefield. Because there's so much of this political correctness associated with that, making some people afraid of getting into the discussion. So I think it's a more tolerant environment would be better, would be more encouraging for people to come for the discussion, not be afraid of making mistakes, but be afraid of sticking to wrong idea all the time. Right. So I think that's the way we should move forward.
Yeah. Would you say that there is an evolutionary explanation for why human biological sex is relatively binary compared to other species that are more different?
The intersex individuals are always a minority. Currently, we have a lot of data from humans, but far less data from other species. So that is one of the ways we move forward and see how human situation is comparable with others. But we have a lot of data from insects, such as ants, bees, and wasps, where the majority are intersex individuals. But we would like to see something more at home, the mammals. So I think that's, we need more research. I cannot, I'm unable to say much about that. But yeah, yes, that's the way we move forward.
Okay. I was also hoping you can share a bit about your research process and your methodological approaches. How are you looking for finding evidence and
Yeah, read a lot, and think a lot, and open my mind to different groups of organisms, such as, for example, the fungi. 5 million species and very little known. So into different situations and see how these sects evolved into different directions and how they deal with evolutionary challenges, and how the binary sex is not the norm, actually. It's the sex diversity is actually norm. And as you have seen, some of the mushrooms have so many proto-sexes. So yeah, I think there are so many different ways of eking out a living.
And can you explain, or how would you explain the process by which the eel goes from producing eggs to producing sperm? How does that change physically happen?
That's a great question. We don't know much about this species, but we do know quite a lot about the clownfish. The clownfish, due to a group of researchers at especially University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and they found that during the transitional process, they have both ovaries and testes available. But then during the transition process, the entire system under a 180, and including the sex organs development, and also the neural wiring reorganization, and different, the estradiol, which is the female-related hormone, began to pump up, and then change everything to developing the ovaries instead of testes.
Okay. So earlier in your talk, you quoted Wittgenstein on the limits of language. Is the science of biology limited by its foundation in binary thinking?
Yes, definitely. When we think, when we have clearly defined new concepts, and that will move forward. That's the first step, actually. So a lot of confusions are due to this language. And by the way, the English, Germanic language versus Romantic language are so gendered that it is a hard part of learning a new language. But Chinese is less gendered, but still there are some gendered words as well. But I think that's part of the inertia that would drag us back. So I think Wittgenstein was right, even 100 years ago.
And how do you hope your work will impact both the scientific community and the broader public's understanding of sex and gender?
I hope that from now on, more people will be interested in synthesis of information, keep an open mind, and introducing more discoveries, and write and tell, inform a general audience about the newest developments of our scientific advancements, especially in molecular biology, biomedicine, and all these areas. I think people's current understanding is at 30 years ago, and basically based on our human intuition. What we see is right. The issue is no, not anymore. For a deeper understanding, we have to look at the deeper level of information, sort of like the physics, from Newtonian physics to the current general relativity or even to the quantum mechanics. It's a huge transition that we should be ready for that kind of challenge as science advances.
Okay. And so one of the, I guess, take-home messages that I gathered from the talk really is this idea that, challenging this notion that sex is this biological construct distinct from gender as a social construct, but really there is this bidirectional relationship, and we can't understand one without understanding the other through, right? And so, that leads me to my next question, which is, some might argue then that our conceptualization of gender is specific to humans, and you touched upon that a bit in your talk. And so I'm curious about how you respond to those critiques and how you challenge that notion and extend our understanding of gender to other animals and other things.
If we limit the words for human alone, it's difficult to understand the evolutionary connection. And much of the attributes which, for example, used to be human unique, such as tool use culture, they have been gradually taken down by new discoveries. I think gender is the same issue. And we have to look at the big picture, look at other species in addition to humans, such as chimpanzees and other bonobos and other primates, at least, and there should be more. So, and that kind of broad understanding will actually shed new light as to what gender really is. And we come up to a consensus. And that is still a challenge for science now. And I hope social scientists will also contribute to the discourse.
Right. And so not going so far as what NSF did and doing away with sex and only focusing on gender, but really considering both sex and gender across different living species. Right?
Yeah, I think so. And from my study, you can see that gender has its own, banning gender has its own adaptive value.
Okay, and I think we have time for one final question. So this extremely rich presentation should be made mandatory for individuals who make decisions about the lives of LGBTQ persons without basic knowledge of the facts. Is there a way to make your work part of that public conversation or discourse?
I think I get people to think of these issues. The minorities should also be treated equally. Minorities should not be, because they are certain kind of minority, should not be treated differently. I think we should be open-minded, embracing the diversity. And at the same time, we try to find the reasons behind, and that is our job. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think we are at time, and so thank you again, Lixing, for your insightful, interesting presentation and perspectives and sharing them with us. I also want to thank our audience for their terrific questions, and I hope you'll be able to join us for other Radcliffe virtual programs. You can find out more about future programs and watch videos of past events at radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.